Hello. Hi everyone, my name's Christian. Before I start, I just want to thank everyone for being here. There's so many parachains here. After such a crazy couple of years, it feels surreal to be in a room with so many people. So I just want to genuinely thank everyone because it's amazing to meet so many people who I've only ever seen on Twitter before, and to actually create these kind of relationships with other parachains I think is really important. And I'm just really happy to be here. Today I'll be talking about a few different topics. My first topic, I'll be talking a little bit about myself and my experience and how I got involved in Polkadot. Secondly, I'll be talking about my parachain Oak network, which I work at. Finally, I'll talk about parachains and research and how we can improve our relationships between certain parachains by using a research model to make sure that we're really collaborating in a way that actually scales. And finally, I'll talk a little bit about improving your skills for individuals who don't currently work in Polkadot or work for a parachain and want to kind of increase their capabilities so that they can transition into working within our space. The purpose of my talk is to really advocate for why research methods and principles are valuable to parachains. Outside of that, I also really want to create insights into how individuals can improve their research skills so that they can really take on more positions within the community. This is going to be a much less technical talk than a lot of the other talks that we've listened to today and over the last few days, but I really want to make it accessible to everyone, not just people who currently work at parachains. I really want to make it so that we are kind of creating an environment where people are learning and can kind of get involved in everything. A little bit about myself. I work at Oak Network as a research specialist, and I'm currently completing a PhD in Business Information Systems at RMIT University in Australia. What does a research specialist do for a parachain? That's a kind of question that I get asked a lot, and I have a kind of fancy version that I put on my LinkedIn, but the simple version is that I create and review documentation for our parachain. A parachain has a really large need for a variety of different documentation. I'm sure a lot of people here have kind of experienced that. And it requires a different kind of understanding and knowledge to kind of translate that information. The developers on my team come up with some amazing stuff, but to actually make that accessible for other people is a difficult requirement to get through, and that's something that I kind of focus on. When I tell people that I'm a research specialist, for people outside of a .sama ecosystem or outside of cryptocurrency, they're often quite surprised. But if I tell someone that works at a parachain what I do of creating documentation, they almost instantly get it because they understand that there's such a demand for this type of information. There's so much information spread across a variety of places like Twitter, random Discord channels, random meditations, things like that. And to get it actually to refine that data and present it to your team is quite important, and it creates a large need for advancing what you're trying to do. A little bit about myself. World of Warcraft is where my research path kind of began. Usually when I talk about World of Warcraft, I have to explain a lot about it, but I think within this room, a lot of us have a lot of experience within this kind of field. I started playing World of Warcraft when I was about 15 years old, and I eventually ended up running one of the largest and most successful guilds within Australia. I have learned a lot from World of Warcraft, and something that I've talked about a lot to other people from Polkadot is the similarities between World of Warcraft and Polkadot. Polkadot is this new thing, and if you talk to people outside of Polkadot or outside of cryptocurrency, they often have very little understanding of the concepts or kind of what's going on, and that's very similar to World of Warcraft. And in the same way that we have this system of Polkadot and then parachains, World of Warcraft represents a very similar kind of aspect where they have their guilds on top of it. So as a parachain, we all want to be the best parachain. Whilst we do need to collaborate to a certain extent, there's an element of competition against us, but a still need to collaborate, which creates a sort of element of tension, which is very similar to kind of competitive gaming. So I find that understanding that insights that come from World of Warcraft are actually quite useful for Polkadot. After being involved in World of Warcraft for a while, I transitioned to League of Legends and esports, which I'm sure a lot of you are probably familiar with as well. I created one of the most well-known Australian teams back in the day, and we learned a lot of really good kind of insights. And the core kind of insight that's similar from League of Legends and esports within a parachain is the idea that you really need to have a strong understanding of what the kind of competition is doing. From a parachain perspective, if you don't have a strong understanding of what the other parachains are doing, it really limits your potential for what your team can do. And the information across all parachains is really, really diverse. So kind of being in a position to actually collate that data and information and present it back to your team represents a large difficulty of what you do, and that's very similar to what you kind of do within an online gaming kind of world. After that, I ended up working at Riot Games on the esports team, and there's a lot of lessons that I learned there that is very applicable to Polkadot as well. I have a little story, but Australia is not the biggest region when it comes to sports or when it comes to anything. But one year we decided that we really wanted to try and become much more competitive within the region against the much bigger places. So we decided to pool all the teams together, and instead of competing as hectically as we always used to do, we decided to share our resources to try to improve, to make it much better in the global scale. But what we ended up finding out was that working together was extremely difficult because we had all structured our kind of positions in a completely different way. The resources that one team had created was completely different to the resources that another team had created, and the ability to collaborate was almost impossible. And that's the kind of similarity to what may happen with parachains within Polkadot, that if we don't adopt kind of principles and strategies to make us all grow in a similar way, it makes it very difficult to collaborate. And that's a lesson that I think a lot of us will need to learn moving forward, that if we don't adopt kind of standards and principles, it's going to be quite difficult. After I left Riot Games, I started working in mobile games. I'm not going to mention which developer I worked for. It was a relatively large one, but I learned a lot of lessons there. Essentially what my job was to do there was to create the horrible services that you guys are probably all know about. So I designed loot boxes, I designed lots and lots of strategies to trick users into purchasing, buying, spending far too much money, and that was kind of my first experience into cryptocurrency. And that's when I started learning more about blockchain, and eventually I left the mobile gaming industry because it was just too much to work on. It's such predatory behavior, and I learned a strong lesson there that you need to believe in what you're doing, and that's a big part of what makes Polkadot so great, is that it's not this kind of ecosystem where we're just trying to make as much money or make everything as big as possible. There's a genuine caring for the community, which I think is a really positive thing that we have. After I did that, I also have a Master's of Business Information Technology. This is where I learned a lot of the business processes that I think is really important for Polkadot, because having this structured approach to our scalability is really critical to making sure that we can reach a level where we can all kind of work effectively together. I've also done a lot of content creation for when it comes to Polkadot. I've written research papers about the funding mechanisms through the crowd loans. I've been lucky enough to contribute to over 35 different parachains crowd loans, and that was kind of what led me into the Polkadot universe first. I'm also a PhD business information student. My thesis topic is dynamics and key influences of fintech entrepreneurial ecosystems. I've made it all pink and shiny and cool here to make it sound more interesting than it really is. But essentially, I map mechanisms for how fintech entrepreneurial ecosystems emerge and how the businesses need to structure themselves to transition from small-scale businesses to medium-scale businesses, and a lot of the influences within that sphere, which is obviously quite relevant to Polkadot. So that's a little bit about my experience. And then eventually, after all that got put together, I started working at Oak Network, which is a parachain on Kusama, and eventually will be on Polkadot as well. Here's a cute little picture from my LinkedIn, which I think looks good. I know there's a couple of Australians, they might recognize the oak milk there. You don't really get that anywhere else, but yeah, that's why I've included that. So Oak Network. Oak Network is a secure and trustless automation hub. We're focused on creating payments and finance infrastructure for the Web 3.0. we really intend to work with a variety of parachains to kind of create functionality that everyone really wants. Our ethos is really not just your coins, your keys, but also your plan. If you want to create functionality, we all want to do that in a genuine, trustless manner so that people can really work on what they want and you feel safe and that users can do whatever they really want. We're trying to create bespoke functionality for every parachain, so we're interested in working with any parachain who wants to work with us, and we think that's an important ethos to share across the Polkadot ecosystem. Here's a picture of our team looking genuinely beautiful. Unfortunately, I'm not in this photo because being in Australia, it's a little bit, but it seemed to not include this picture seems like a bad idea. A lot of our team has a really unique experience from traditional finance to traditional software. Our founders both worked at Microsoft and they have some really unique experience, and it's really a rock star team and I'm honored to be a part of it. We recently completed our Turing crowd loan, which we are now producing blocks on Kusama, which was a really exciting opportunity for us, not just to finally actually start producing blocks, but to really interact with our community, and we're really thankful that we managed to onboard. A little bit of statistics, we had we had 1,200 unique contributors, and we raised over 15,000 KSM, and it's been a great experience, especially for someone like me who's been so involved in crowd loans originally. To be in a position to actually win a crowd loan spot was a real bucket list of mine, so I'm really, really happy about that. We have some key features here: DEX integration, price triggers, recurring actions, dollar cost averaging, smart contract triggers and actions. These are all of the plans that we have, but we really want to create functionality that everyone wants. There's people in here and parachains in here that will want to create things that we aren't even ready for yet, or we don't know what it will be. But if it's something that you want and you want it done trustlessly and automated, that's what we want to create. We're also very focused on our community. I know Alex from Poker House talked a lot about it, but having that organic community outreach, I think, is really important within a space with Polkadot, because that's key to us growing. There's a perception of what Polkadot is for everyone in this room that works in the sphere already, but bridging that to the actual community perception is going to be very important as we scale. So, and I'm very excited to kind of see how that develops. So now I'll talk a little bit about parachains and the research and how we can create value. So why is research important for parachains? There's lots of reasons why research is useful, but the biggest differentiator between a parachain's research and a traditional business research is the uniqueness of each parachain. Even two parachains that are offering very similar services can have completely different structure. And because collaboration is a core fundamental idea across Polkadot, if there's no understanding into the structure and the documentation behind how these parachains are created, the ability for us to work together is going to be extremely limited. So using research to make sure that these kind of fundamentals are understood is going to be very, very important. A big aspect of that is the record keeping and documentation. Documentation covers a lot of aspects, and there's a lot of areas in which I believe that Polkadot can be improved by having a very strong foundational documentation principles. One example that I have is the use of failure documentation. Inevitably, we will eventually reach parachains that have to fail. That's an inevitability that we can't really get past, but understanding the causes and influences of those types of failures is going to be extremely important for past and future parachains and new projects entering the space. So having a consistent approach to that type of documentation is going to be extremely useful for genuine scalability. So applying these types of principles is going to be very, very useful and something that I'm a really strong advocate for. Again, collaboration. Collaboration is a term that gets kind of discussed in Polkadot all the time, but there's more to collaboration than just XCM, and a lot of that is understanding the needs of each other's parachains and working with each other. Working with each other, and not just from a technical perspective, but from things like marketing, community, business processes. All of that type of information requires a lot of effort which can be reduced by the use of research methodologies. Another big use of research is the ability to remove assumptions from decision making. In the last talk, we heard a lot about removing misconceptions, and it's one thing to kind of discuss the feel of it, but by using a data approach and a research approach, we can actually challenge and transition those assumptions into genuine facts. One of the best benefits of the blockchain is how data rich it is. So as opposed to being in a position where often my developer team will have kind of conversations, be like, I feel like this is what's going on, or I feel like this is the current community sentiment, and transitioning from that into a position where we actually use the data to enforce those decisions and create facts and remove assumptions is a very beneficial thing that I think all parachains could use. Another aspect that research can be very beneficial is the adoption of research studies. I know the Web3 Foundation has been working on some really great research studies, but from a parachain perspective, we can really look at a lot of different kind of aspects of our ecosystem and take away that assumption and look at it objectively and grow on it. I think the adoption of research studies across all of the parachains to collaborate together for this will be something that could be very, very beneficial in the future and something that I'm really looking forward to. Again, we have such a data-rich environment. The guys from SubSquid have put together some really great data tools to look at everything. And one of the largest challenges within research is often the collection and processing of data. Collecting data can be a really difficult aspect of any research, but within our ecosystem, we have so much data available, it seems silly not to be really utilizing that. Another core area where research can be useful is within XCM. XCM is obviously very important from a technical perspective for facilitating that collaboration, but there's also many other aspects of facilitating that collaboration which has nothing to do with the technical side. Understanding which people to reach out to at different parachains, or how that we talk to each other, or the methods of where we talk to each other is going to be extremely important for actually actualizing the XCM functionality of working together. And that's the kind of thing that I think a research study could be very beneficial for multiple parachains to adopt. And my parachain Oak Network is very keen to look at this further. We've been working with Mangata to understand the needs of XCM from a non-technical perspective so that we can really create that understanding of working together and not just building together, because that's going to be really important for scalability. The other area that I think is useful for a research study is the idea of governance 3.0. Once governance 3.0 reaches Kusama, we're going to see a very different and much more unpredictable kind of environment, because whilst we have a strong understanding of all of our feelings about the governance and how we want everything structured, once that becomes a fully community-driven area, we will learn a much different aspect of how the perception of Polkadot is different from people within compared to without. So adopting a research study to take an understanding of actually how those things are progressing could be a real benefit for our entire ecosystem. Next, I'm going to talk a little bit about working in Polkadot and how, as an individual, you can kind of improve your skills. This is much more for people who have not really worked within cryptocurrency before and for people that don't come from a technical kind of background. It might seem kind of strange to pitch that so much, but a huge part of our ability to scale is going to require much more staff members that aren't from the backgrounds of developers and people that really want to help grow, so like business devs. It's kind of like a weird word to kind of discuss around here, but that's going to be really important for us to reach that scalability that is like a core foundation of Polkadot. And so I'm going to give a few insights into how you as an individual can learn a little bit more about how you want to develop your skills. The most important thing that you need to do if you want to improve your skills within Polkadot is you need to engage with a community. It doesn't really matter which community that you engage with, because there's so many now, but making sure that you're in a position where you're learning more about people, that you're listening to people's talks, you're listening to people's Discord conversations, and you're trying your best to reach out to people, makes you get a much deeper understanding. There's a large demand for a lot of different skills within Polkadot, and once you're within those types of communities, you can get a much greater understanding of what's needed. A big part of what I advocate for is understanding what you're good at. You don't have to be the same as anyone else. I have a friend who's recently started doing a lot of graphic design work for different parachains and for projects within Polkadot, and he's developed his skill set outside of the ecosystem, but it's super beneficial for us to be attracting types of professionals like that. There's so many demands for things that we need done that have nothing to do with actual technical development. Proofreading is another fantastic example of something that you can take for granted, but is so important within Polkadot right now. Having like those types of skills, so being in type of a position where understanding what you're good at and bringing that into the ecosystem is really, really useful and something that I really advocate for a lot. The second aspect is just create things. We need lots of different things within our ecosystem to reach that kind of level of usability and adoption by regular users. So if you're interested in the ecosystem and you're a graphic designer or a writer or anything, start creating. It doesn't have to be anything complex. If you don't have an idea, you can simply go to a community session, listen to someone's community call, and start taking notes and distribute those notes across. Because that type of data creation is really useful, and there's so many types of areas where you can utilize that. So my greatest advice is to really focus on creation, and it doesn't matter what it is, but focus on creating something that's yours and then sharing it out into the community that you've joined. That's my whole talk. I tried to keep it short. Thank you very much for listening, and I really appreciate all your time. Thank you.